Today we are talking about Blackthorn Hammer. Blackthorn Hammer is something I've actually recently talked about already in the most dead item tree, and well, I don't know if Hi-Rez listened or if they were planning to change it anyways, but it has been changed. Blackthorn Hammer will get a buff in patch 5.15. The change is described by Hi-Rez as follows. Blackthorn Hammer has rarely been seen in Season 5. The item has a strong passive effect, but lacked a clear focus on roll. We are shifting the stats on this item to make it a clear option for warriors who want to play more like true tanks. The passive effect works especially well on tanky characters as they can maximize the time spent above or below 50% HP. Increase the health from 350 to 450. Increased physical power from 30 to 25. Now, I think a few statements here are a little bit ironic. First of all, the item has a strong passive is a bit relative. Above 50% HP, the passive is 10% cooldown reduction. That's not exactly insane for a passive. There are a lot of items that simply have 10% cooldown reduction under any given circumstance, or even have more than 10% cooldown reduction. The passive is interesting below 50%, giving you back a lot of mana, basically meaning it's almost impossible to go out of mana unless you just absolutely spam away your abilities. But at the same time, that is only under 50%, so it's very conditional. So I think it's a solid passive, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a strong passive. Or rather, there are other passives that are stronger. At the same time, the other statement is that this should be a more clear option for warriors who want to play more like true tanks. What makes me wonder about that is, if this is for true tanks, then why does the item still have 25 physical power? If it was a purely tank item, then it wouldn't have aggressive stats, because these aggressive stats come with a trade-off of having less defensive stats than other items in some scenarios. But nevertheless, these changes are very interesting. After all, 450 HP on an item is the highest HP value you can get from an item that doesn't require you to stack it first. And with aggressive items in solo not being completely out of the picture anymore with the changed meta, why not look into it a little bit more? In order to do that, I took various different items of very different viability levels, especially for solo, that could be used to be compared with Blackthorn for different purposes. The items that I have for that are Blackthorn Hammer itself, obviously, Stone of Gaia, which is in a similar ballpark when it comes to the HP, and has been an item that has been used in solo for a while for its sustain, though it's dropped off quite a lot lately. Spirit Robe, just to show how a counterpart with the same CDR and defense stats is in terms of defensive performance, basically just seeing how mixed defense matches up against a lot of health. Then Runic Shield, which is used to counter magicals at the moment and is more of a aggressive choice as well, with a little bit of power added to it. Shield of Regrowth, simply because it also has a lot of health and cooldown reduction at the same time, and HP 5 and MP 5 as well. And Mail of Renewal, which is kind of also a similar thing, a lot of HP, CDR and a bit of HP 5. And then Breastplate of Valor to show how Blackthorn compares to a physical defense item that's relatively frequently used still, that focuses on cooldown reduction, even though Valor has a little bit more here. And last but not least, Pestilence to also include a magical defense item that is hybrid in a sense of having HP as well as magical defense, and has very good effective HP. Difference here being that this is purely focused on defensive stats, whereas Blackthorn has this mix. I'm going to show you the whole stat overview here. You should be familiar with most of these stats, or you can pause the video at this point to go over Blackthorn. So once again, we have 450 HP now, we have 10% CDR above 50% mana, and 50 MP5 below 50% mana. Can't really show that in here, so I just had to write in both. We have 25 power, and we also have 200 flat mana, which shouldn't be entirely forgotten. Price-wise, almost all of these items are around the same range, between 2,100 to 2,300 gold. The only exception being Spirit Robe, but that's not an item you build early anyways, it's just to show how defense compares to a lot of HP in general. Now I'm gonna do some numbers here, but I'm also gonna let you know that I cannot cover the full scope of the potential in this video. And that is due to the fact that with any HP item or any defense item, the effectiveness depends on your level. You get a significant amount of health over leveling from level 1 to 20. You also get some defense as well, and depending on that, which stat is more beneficial to buy at any point can kind of shift a little bit at least. So what we're going to look into here doesn't necessarily apply the same way if you already have built 4 items and you are level 20, because then depending on what stats those items have, the benefits may be very different for you. What we are going to look into is Blackthorn's viability as the item that you build after finishing your boots. So that build for a solo laner where you most likely will build Blackthorn Hammer will include Warrior's Blessing as well as Warrior Tabi, and then one of the items that I named before. So we're using the base stats for level 10 and then we're adding the extra defenses and health from a fully stacked Warrior's Blessing. I will not include the damage values here because that only really is significant for Blackthorn Hammer as well as Runic Shield, and they are not super far apart in power anyways, and it would depend too much on which character you're playing, what kind of scale links they have and anything, and that in solo lane especially can be very, very different between characters. What should be obvious is that the item is geared to ability-based characters based on the cooldown reduction, and I was initially gonna say with the exception of Kukulin, because he doesn't really make use of mana, but the item may, after all, not be terrible for Kukulin, at least from the benefits, because while he doesn't actually have mana, he has a theoretical mana pool that is always full, always 100, so he just gets straight 10% cooldown reduction out of this item, plus he still gets the extra HP from the 200 mana with his conversion to the passive. So if you're looking for a high health, a little bit of power item with 10% cooldown reduction on Kukulin, you could still go for Blackthorn Hammer, and he would get even more health than anyone else. But what does this amount of HP result in? We'll take out the exception of Kukulin here and just go for the normal health value that you get from this item. It would be slightly better for Kukulin. So on a level 10 Guan Yu with Warrior's Blessing, Warrior Tabi, and one of these items, in Blackthorn's case, we have 1835 HP, and we have the base protections of 56 and 39. That in a scenario where the enemy doesn't have penetration, which is at least likely when you're playing against another solo laner, they will probably go for defensive items at the start as well, or something with a little bit of power, will be 2863 physical effective health and 2551 magical effective health. How do other items compare? Son of Gaia would be 2785 physical effective health and 2481 magical effective health, but Son of Gaia also has a lot more HP 5, so you regenerate a lot of HP on top of that, which should effectively result in more HP in most situations. Spirit Robe, on the other hand, or a slightly more expensive defensive choice, will end up with 2715 physical effective health and 2479 magical effective health. So 40 protections each are not enough to compete with the 450 HP here. And that's despite Spirit Robe being more expensive. Runic Shield is a little bit more interesting, as that is an item you would build against a magical, and in this case the physical effective health goes down to 2317. The magical effective health, on the other hand, goes up to 2807, plus you also reduce the enemy's magical power, so their damage can be reduced even more if they're building into power. They probably have a little bit of power from their boots, so there could be a little bit of extra reduction that technically gives you more effective health. What we can see here at this point is that with Blackthorn, the disparity between the effective physical and magical health is relatively small, around 300, whereas with Runic Shield the difference is closer to 500. Even if you're against a magical in lane, you will still take some physical damage from the minions at least, so this is something worth keeping in mind. While you obviously counter a aggressive magical character better with Runic Shield, it's not completely out of the picture that a lot of health can help as well. Shield of Regrowth and Mail of Renewal are just here to give a bit more perspective of CDR items with health. They will obviously have less effective health. They make up for it a little bit through 10 HP 5, but that's just a minor thing here in comparison most of the time. Breastplate of Valor again is interesting, as this is a purely anti-physical item. This is a total physical effective health of 3061, but only 1925 magical effective health. Pestilence, on the other hand, being a much more effective item in the magical department, has 2473 physical effective health, but 3471 magical effective health. In solo lane, having the best effective early game counter is crucial to get as much leverage over your opponent as possible. As such, I think in most situations you're better off buying a direct counter item. Even if it's just a little bit more HP here and there, it can really pay off with Valor or with Pestilence or with Runic Shield especially. But that doesn't mean that I think Blackthorn Hammer in its current state is still not worth picking up at all. Quite the opposite. I think the interesting part here is the synergy with other items. If you go into an item like Breastplate of Valor, you're very vulnerable to magical attacks. If you add Blackthorn Hammer after that as your third item, then you have a lot of effective HP overall, your physical defense and effective HP is completely through the roof, but you're also geared a little bit against magical attacks too. Now obviously this is not the same level of health and defense in combination as you would for example get from Hide of the Urchin, which when fully stacked is probably a lot more effective without even doing the numbers here. But it is definitely something that can be utilized when you keep in mind that this item is not purely defensive. This item still has extra power, that means you deal extra damage and you have extra pressure in lane 2. So even if you're looking for a second slot item that's just more aggressive than the other ones and Runic Shield is not an option because you're against a physical, Blackthorn is something worth keeping in mind. I think it will still have a hard time establishing itself because so much of solo lane is about countering and it doesn't really offer any direct counter. You have to have that aggressive playstyle that makes it rewarding, and at the same time you have to have enough benefit from that little bit of power and the CDR that you get out of it. Mana is usually not the rarest stat for most gods. Most gods aren't after MP5, so you have to find that place where you can build it. But compared to its version last patch, I think Blackthorn definitely has gained viability. And that's it for this video. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button with bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one soon. DukeSloth, out.